I never thought I'd be the type of mother who would sell the cherished family vacation home out from under my own children. But then again, I never imagined I'd be sitting alone at our grand oak dining table on Christmas Day, surrounded by unopened presents and untouched holiday food, staring at 3 empty chairs that should have held my adult children. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, marking the 3rd hour I'd waited, something inside me finally broke. After 32 years of prioritizing their happiness over my own, I knew exactly what one phone call to my real estate agent would do. And I made it. My name is Margaret Wilson. I spent 35 years as an elementary school teacher before retiring 4 years ago. Teaching was never just a career for me. It was my calling. I understood children, how they thought, how they grew, and most importantly, how the foundation you build in their early years shapes the adults they eventually become. What I failed to understand until it was almost too late was that love without boundaries creates entitlement, not gratitude. The lakeside cabin in Pine Haven had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his own hands in 1952, a rustic 2-bedroom retreat that my father later expanded when I was just a girl. Some of my earliest memories were formed on that wooden dock, learning to swim in the clear mountain water, my father's strong hands supporting me until I found my confidence. Later, it was where Jack proposed to me during a breathtaking summer sunset, the lake water gilded with orange and pink light as he knelt on the weather-worn planks. After Jack and I married, we spent every summer there, eventually bringing our own children, Emma, Daniel, and Lisa, to create their own memories. I can still picture them as they were then. Emma constructing elaborate sandcastles along the shore, her brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel learning to fish with Jack, his excited shouts when he caught his first bass echoing across the water. Little Lisa collecting colorful stones and arranging them in patterns on the cabin's wide porch. When Jack passed away suddenly from a heart attack 12 years ago, the cabin became even more precious to me. It was where I felt closest to him, where I could sit on our favorite bench and almost feel the weight of his arm around my shoulders, hear the echo of his laugh carried on the breeze. The children seemed to understand this. For the first few years after his death, they made a point of spending holidays with me at the cabin, keeping our family traditions alive. But as they grew older, built their own lives, these visits became less frequent, the excuses more elaborate. Emma moved to Seattle for a prestigious law firm position, married Warren, and had twins. Daniel settled in Chicago with his wife Jen, launching a tech startup that consumed his nights and weekends. Lisa, my youngest, chose Denver, working as a marketing executive and traveling internationally with such frequency that scheduling time together became an exercise in advanced mathematics. Still, we had Christmas. No matter what, Christmas at the cabin remained our unbreakable tradition, or so I thought. We would gather for 3 days of festivity, cookie baking, tree decorating, gift exchanging, and Jack's famous eggnog recipe that I continued to make each year in his honor. Even as other holidays fell by the wayside, Christmas remained sacred. Last year had been the first warning sign, though I'd been too afraid to acknowledge it. Emma arrived a day late, explaining that her daughter's dance recital couldn't be missed. Daniel and Jen stayed only one night, citing an important investor meeting on the 26th. Lisa called from an airport in Tokyo, apologizing profusely that her flight had been canceled due to weather, promising to make it up to me later. I told myself it was fine. Families evolve. Adult children have responsibilities. I was being selfish to expect them to prioritize their aging mother over their own lives. Jack would have told me I was making excuses for them, that I needed to express my feelings rather than burying them beneath a cheerful facade. But Jack wasn't there, and I had spent so many years being the understanding mother that I didn't know how to be anything else. This past autumn, I called each of them to confirm our Christmas plans, starting in September to ensure they could arrange their schedules accordingly. 3 enthusiastic confirmations later, I began preparations with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I had the cabin professionally cleaned, the fireplace inspected, and new guest linens purchased for each bedroom. I spent weeks selecting the perfect gifts. A handcrafted jewelry box for Emma filled with restored pieces of my mother's collection I thought she would treasure. A first edition of Daniel's favorite childhood book, along with a leather-bound journal embossed with the logo of his company. And for Lisa, a photo album I had painstakingly assembled, documenting her fearless adventures from her first steps to her recent travels, interspersed with my own handwritten memories. 2 weeks before Christmas, I drove up to the cabin to prepare. The forecast predicted snow, promising the white Christmas we all loved. I strung lights along the porch, hung garlands on the stairs, and set up the artificial tree in the corner of the living room, leaving it undecorated so we could continue our tradition of trimming it together. I stocked the refrigerator and pantry with ingredients for all their favorite holiday dishes: Emma's gingerbread cookies, Daniel's preferred honey-glazed ham, Lisa's beloved peppermint hot chocolate. The kitchen had always been the heart of our family gatherings. The cabin's kitchen wasn't particularly large or modern, but its well-worn butcher block counters and the ancient gas stove had produced countless memorable meals. Jack used to say the imperfections gave it character: the stubborn cabinet drawer that needed a special touch to open, the uneven floorboard near the sink that creaked underfoot. After his death, I had considered renovating, bringing the space into the current century, but something always stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of Jack standing at that stove, teaching the children to flip pancakes on Sunday mornings, or the ghost of Emma's laughter as she perched on the counter, stealing cookie dough despite my playful swats. 3 days before Christmas, the snow arrived as predicted, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in Jack's old cardigan, watching the flakes descend in the glow of the multicolored lights. The scene was so peacefully beautiful, it almost hurt to look at it, like pressing on a bruise you didn't realize you had. I took a photo and sent it to our family group chat. "Winter Wonderland is ready for you all. Can't wait to see you soon." Emma responded with a heart emoji, Daniel with a thumbs up, and Lisa sent back a snowflake and almost packed. The morning of December 23rd brought the first text message. Emma: "Mom, I'm so sorry, but Tyler has come down with a fever. Warren thinks we should wait an extra day to make sure it's not serious before we drive up. We'll definitely be there for Christmas Eve, though." I responded with reassurance and concern for my grandson, silencing the small voice that whispered this was the beginning of a pattern. I busied myself with final preparations, wrapping the last of the presents and placing them under the tree, arranging the stockings on the mantel, including Jack's, which we still filled each year with small gifts that would later be donated to the local children's hospital. Christmas Eve morning, my phone chimed again. Daniel this time. "Mom, there's a massive problem at work. The server crashed and we might lose months of customer data. I need to get this fixed. Jen is going to her parents instead. Makes more sense than her coming up alone. I promise I'll drive up Christmas Day. Save me some eggnog." I felt the first real twinge of disappointment, but pushed it aside. One day without Daniel and Jen wouldn't ruin our Christmas. Emma and the twins would arrive that evening, and Lisa was already on her way. I would make the best of it. I always did. Mid-afternoon, the call I had been subconsciously dreading came through. Lisa, her voice crackling with poor reception. "Mom, can you hear me? I'm still at the airport. All flights are grounded due to the storm system. They're saying nothing will leave until at least tomorrow afternoon." "But you were supposed to fly in yesterday," I said, unable to keep the confusion from my voice. "You said you were almost packed." "I know, I'm so sorry. A client emergency came up at the last minute. I had to completely rework the campaign and couldn't get away. Tried to call, but it kept going to voicemail. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I feel terrible. I know how important this is to you. I glanced at my phone after we hung up. No missed calls from Lisa. No voicemails. Just the cheerful snowflake emoji from 2 days earlier. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. But I pushed it away. Emma and the twins would still come. We would make new memories, even if our family circle was smaller this year. As twilight approached, bringing with it heavier snowfall, my phone rang again. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and I already knew what she would say before I answered. Mom, Tyler's fever is worse, and now Lily is showing symptoms too. The pediatrician thinks it's just a nasty cold, but with the snow getting heavier and the kids feeling so miserable. Her voice trailed off, the implication clear. You're not coming, I finished for her, my voice flat. I'm so sorry, Mom. You know we would if we could. It's just bad timing with everything. But hey, you'll still have Daniel tomorrow and Lisa the day after. It'll still be a wonderful Christmas. The false brightness in her tone made my chest ache. Maybe we can do a video call when the kids are feeling better? Let them open the presents you sent? After reassuring Emma that the children's health came first, always came first, I hung up and stood in the silent cabin. The emptiness seemed to press in from all sides. The untouched beds in the guest rooms, the stack of board games I'd set out on the coffee table, the refrigerator full of food for a family that wouldn't come. I wandered through the rooms, turning on lights against the gathering darkness, trying to dispel the shadows that seemed to be closing in. In the living room, I plugged in the Christmas tree lights, their colorful glow reflecting off the wrapped packages beneath. For a moment, I could almost pretend that in a few hours, the cabin would be filled with voices and laughter, the chaos and joy of family. But the illusion couldn't hold. The silence was too complete, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, Jack's pride and joy, the one he had lovingly restored the summer before he died. The sound had always been comforting, a steady heartbeat in our home. Tonight, each tick seemed to underscore my solitude, counting down the minutes of a Christmas Eve spent alone. I made myself a simple dinner, soup and bread, nothing like the feast I had planned, and ate at the kitchen counter rather than the elaborately set dining table that now seemed like a cruel joke. Afterward, I poured a glass of wine and carried it to the porch, wrapping myself in a thick blanket against the cold. The snow continued to fall, each flake catching the colored lights before disappearing into the growing blanket below. In the distance, across the frozen lake, I could see the warm glow of windows from the handful of other cabins occupied during the holiday. Families together, creating memories, honoring traditions. Everything I had planned to do with my own children. Back inside, I curled up on the sofa and stared at the phone, willing it to ring, to bring news of changed plans, of children who had moved heaven and earth to be with their mother at Christmas. But it remained silent, its dark screen reflecting the twinkling lights of the tree. I must have fallen asleep there, because I woke with a start as sunlight streamed through the windows. Christmas morning. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, I expected to hear the excited whispers of children trying to be quiet, the creak of floorboards as they crept down to see if Santa had come. Then reality crashed back, and I remembered. I was alone on Christmas Day. Daniel had promised to come today, but after yesterday's disappointments, I couldn't bring myself to believe he would actually arrive. Still, I went through the motions. I showered and dressed in the festive red sweater I had bought specially for the occasion. I made coffee and a small breakfast, then settled in the living room to wait. The hours crawled by. I tried calling Daniel at noon, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a cheerful message asking what time I should expect him, working to keep any hint of doubt from my voice. Then I began preparations for Christmas dinner, determined that we would have our traditional meal, even if it was just the two of us. By 4 o'clock, with the ham in the oven and side dishes prepared, I tried Daniel again. This time, he answered on the fourth ring, background noise nearly drowning out his voice. "Mom! Merry Christmas!" He sounded distracted, the words slightly slurred. Celebration sounds surrounded him. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. "Merry Christmas, Daniel. I was just wondering what time you're planning to arrive. Dinner will be ready around 6, but I can keep it warm if you're running late." A pause. Too long to be anything but significant. "Arrive? Oh God, Mom. Didn't you get my message?" "What message?" I asked, though I already knew there had been none. "I sent a text this morning. The server issue took all night to resolve. I just couldn't make the drive after being up for 36 hours straight. James invited the team over for Christmas dinner to thank us for the emergency work. I'm at his place now." The sounds of celebration continued behind him, a stark contrast to the silence enveloping me. "I see," I said, my voice distant even to my own ears. "No, I didn't get your message." "I'm so sorry, Mom. I really thought you knew. I wouldn't have left you hanging like that." But he had. They all had. "Look, why don't I drive up the day after tomorrow? We can do a belated Christmas." "That would be nice," I replied automatically, the social script taking over when my real thoughts were too painful to voice. After we hung up, I moved to the dining room where I had set the table for two with our best china and Jack's grandmother's, silver. The centerpiece I had crafted from pine boughs, red candles, and glass ornaments seemed excessive now, almost mocking in its festivity. I sat at the head of the table, Jack's place at the opposite end conspicuously empty as it had been for 12 years. But now, the 3 chairs meant for my children gaped like open wounds. 12 hours of cooking for a meal no one would eat. Presents no one would open. Traditions no one seemed to value but me. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7 times, startling me out of my reverie. 3 hours I had been sitting there, staring at empty chairs, letting the carefully prepared food grow cold. Something inside me shifted then, a tectonic movement in my heart. I had spent years making excuses for my children's growing distance, interpreting their absences in the most generous light possible, blaming circumstances rather than choices. But sitting alone at that Christmas table, the truth became impossible to ignore. My children hadn't been prevented from coming. They had chosen not to come. Year after year, they had demonstrated through their actions what place I held in their lives. Not a priority, but an obligation. A commitment easily broken when something more appealing presented itself. I stood abruptly and began clearing the table, scraping untouched food into the trash with mechanical movements. The ham, perfectly glazed and fragrant with cloves. The scalloped potatoes Jack had taught me to make during our first year of marriage. The green bean casserole that had been Daniel's favorite since childhood. Emma's beloved cranberry sauce made from my grandmother's recipe. Lisa's preferred honey-glazed carrots. All of it, prepared with care and love, now sliding into the garbage bin. As I washed dishes, my mind kept returning to the lake outside. How many summer afternoons had we spent on that shore? How many bonfires on cool autumn evenings? When the children were young, Jack would carry sleeping bodies from the fire pit to their beds, tucking them in with sandy feet and dreams full of stars. Later, as teenagers, they'd brought friends to share in our family paradise, proud to show off the legacy passed down through generations. After Jack died, I had kept the cabin running through my teacher's pension and careful budgeting. Each repair, each tax payment, each gallbladder of heating oil purchased with the understanding that this place wasn't just property. It was the physical embodiment of our family's history and future. A gift I was maintaining for my children and eventually their children. But what is a gift worth when it isn't valued? What is a family home when the family doesn't come home? With sudden clarity, I knew what I needed to do, not in the heat of emotion or as punishment, but as a clear-eyed recognition of reality. This beautiful millstone around my neck, draining my limited resources, preserved for children who couldn't be bothered to show up for Christmas, was no longer serving its purpose. I dried my hands, picked up my phone, and scrolled to a contact. I hadn't called in years. Rachel Stevens, the real estate agent who had helped us buy our primary home when the children were small. I had no idea if she still practiced, if she was even in the same state, but I needed to start somewhere. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring, Christmas music playing softly in the background. Margaret? Is that really you? Her voice was just as I remembered, warm and efficient. My goodness, it's been ages. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Rachel, I replied, the traditional greeting feeling hollow after the day I'd had. I apologize for calling on the holiday. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all. We just finished dinner and my son-in-law is setting up a movie for the grandkids. What can I do for you after all this time? Don't tell me you're finally ready to sell that beautiful log home of yours? Actually, it's the cabin at Pine Haven. I think it's time to let it go. Silence greeted my announcement, then a careful, Margaret, are you sure? That property has been in your family for generations. I remember how much it means to you all. Meant, I corrected quietly. Things change, Rachel. Families change. Something in my voice must have conveyed my resolve, because Rachel's tone shifted to professional mode. All right. If you're certain, we can get started right after the holidays. The market for lakefront properties in Pine Haven has been incredibly strong. Even in winter, we should be able to attract significant interest, especially with the history and character your cabin has. We spoke for another 10 minutes, Rachel outlining initial steps and promising to send over comparable sales data the next day. As we ended the call, she added, Margaret, selling a family home is never easy. If you change your mind in the morning, just call me. No harm done. I won't change my mind, I said with a certainty that surprised even me. It's time. After. Hanging up, I walked slowly through the cabin, seeing it with new eyes. Not as the keeper of my family's past, but as a valuable property that could fund a different future. The hand-hewn beams that my grandfather had installed, the stone fireplace where Jack and I had spent countless evenings, the worn path in the kitchen linoleum from decades of family footsteps. All of it, soon to belong to strangers. I should have felt devastated, but instead I felt an odd lightness. As if by making this decision, I had set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. The burden of maintaining not just a property, but the illusion that my family was still the close-knit unit it had once been. In the study, I found myself drawn to the photo gallery wall. Decades of family pictures arranged chronologically. Jack holding newborn Emma with wonder in his eyes. Daniel at 8. Proudly displaying a scraped knee earned from his first attempt at water skiing. Lisa's high school graduation, all of us beaming with pride. The last family photo taken before Jack's death, the 5 of us on the dock at sunset, unaware of how fleeting our complete circle would be. I traced my finger along the edge of that final photo, remembering how secure I had felt in that moment, surrounded by the people I loved most in the world. How certain I had been that nothing fundamental would ever change, that our bonds would endure regardless of distance or circumstances. But I had been wrong. What I mistook for unbreakable connections had been, for my children at least, merely comfortable habits, easily set aside when more pressing concerns or attractive options presented themselves. Perhaps it had been my fault for making myself so perpetually available, so unfailingly understanding, so willing to rearrange my life to accommodate theirs without expectation of reciprocity. Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled against the snowy backdrop, creating a scene straight out of a holiday card. Beautiful. Perfect. and utterly empty of the human connections that would have given it meaning. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of dismantling this shrine to a family that no longer existed as I had imagined it. But tonight, on this strangest of Christmas nights, I would allow myself to mourn what had been lost while beginning to imagine what might still be possible. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, pausing at the top to look back at the silent living room below. The Christmas tree lights glowed steadily, illuminating the unopened presents beneath, tangible evidence of care that had not been reciprocated. For a moment, I considered turning them off, plunging the room into darkness to match my mood. But I left them burning, a small defiance against the shadows, a reminder that even in abandonment, beauty persists. In bed, I found myself thinking not of my absent children, but of Jack. What would he have advised if he were here? He had always been my moral compass, direct where I was diplomatic, firm where I was flexible. I could almost hear his voice, gentle, but uncompromising. "Maggie, my love, you taught those kids about consequences in the classroom for 35 years. Maybe it's time they learned about them in real life." Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the exhaustion of emotional revelation finally overtaking me. When I woke, winter sunlight was streaming through the windows, reflecting off the snow-covered landscape in brilliant white. The day after Christmas, what British Commonwealth countries called Boxing Day, though in America it had no special name, just the quiet aftermath of holiday excess. I reached for my phone, half expecting messages from my children. Apologies, perhaps, or questions about my uncharacteristic silence. There were none. No missed calls, no texts asking if I was all right after spending Christmas alone. Just a cheerful marketing email from an airline advertising post-holiday getaway deals. Surprisingly, their continued obliviousness strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. If they had reached out, shown awareness of how their actions had affected me, perhaps doubt would have crept in. Instead, their silence confirmed what yesterday had made clear. My children had grown accustomed to taking my presence, my understanding, my sacrifice for granted. They assumed I would always be there, unchanging and uncomplaining no matter how they treated me. But people have limits, even mothers. Especially mothers, perhaps, who have spent lifetimes putting others first. I rose and dressed in comfortable clothes, then made a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. As I ate, I composed an email to Rachel, with additional details about the cabin, square footage, recent improvements, the new water heater installed last spring. I attached several photos I had taken recently, showing the property in its winter splendor, snow-laden pines framing the perfect view of the frozen lake. Rachel responded within the hour, efficiency apparently undiminished by the holiday. She confirmed she could arrange for a professional photographer the following day and suggested we list the property before New Year's to catch potential buyers with end-of-year bonuses to invest. The message included a preliminary market analysis that made my breath catch. The estimated sale price was nearly triple what I had anticipated. Years of appreciation, limited lakefront inventory, and the cabin's historic charm all contributed to a valuation that would fundamentally change my financial situation. With such a sum, I could pay off the mortgage on my primary home, establish a comfortable retirement fund, and still have enough left to finally pursue dreams I had set aside during decades of parenthood and widowhood. The cooking classes in Italy, I had always talked about taking. The literary tour of England that Jack and I had planned for our 40th anniversary. A milestone we never reached. Perhaps even the small bookstore in my hometown that was for sale. A retirement business, to keep me engaged and surrounded by the books I loved. None of these possibilities had seemed financially viable before. The cabin, while rich in memories, had been consuming a significant portion of my fixed income. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities for a property that stood empty. Most of the year, waiting for family visits that grew increasingly rare. I spent the morning sorting through the cabin, making lists of what to keep, what to sell with the property, what to donate. The task should have been heartbreaking, but instead I found it cathartic. Each item considered and categorized brought me closer to the truth I had been avoiding. This chapter of my life had ended. The sooner I acknowledged that reality, the sooner I could begin writing the next one. Around noon, my phone finally chimed with a text message. Daniel. Hey Mom, hope you had a nice Christmas despite everything. I can drive up tomorrow if that still works. Let me know. I stared at the message, noting its casual tone, the absence of any real acknowledgement of what everything had entailed. His broken promise, my solitary holiday, the pattern of disappointment that had culminated in my current decision. The old Margaret would have responded immediately, assuring him that tomorrow was perfect, that I understood completely, that nothing needed to be discussed or addressed. But I was no longer that Margaret. Actually, Daniel, I've made other arrangements. I typed, then paused, considering how much to reveal. The cabin will be photographed for listing tomorrow. I've decided to sell it. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then set the phone aside and continued sorting through a cabinet of board games. The ancient Monopoly set with the missing thimble piece. The Scrabble board where Jack had once played quixotic on a triple word score, ending any hope of victory for the rest of us. The deck of cards we used for our annual Christmas Eve poker tournament, the one we had skipped this year because no one had shown up. My phone erupted with notification sounds in rapid succession. Text messages, then a call from Daniel that I let go to voicemail, then more texts. I finished cataloging the games before picking up the phone to read the accumulated messages. Daniel. What? You're selling the cabin? Mom? You can't be serious. Daniel. This is crazy. We need to talk about this. I'm calling you. Daniel. Mom, pick up please. This is too important for text. Emma. Mom, Daniel just called me freaking out. Are you really selling the cabin? What's going on? Lisa. Mom. Daniel says, You're selling our cabin? Please tell me this isn't true. The rapid shift from indifference to panic might have been amusing if it weren't so revealing. For months, years even, I had practically begged for their attention, their presence, their engagement with our family traditions. Now, the moment their inheritance, because that's what they saw it as, not our home but their future asset, was threatened, suddenly I had their undivided attention. I responded to all three in our family group chat. Yes, I've decided to sell the cabin. Rachel Stevens is handling the listing. The photographer comes tomorrow. I'll let you know once it's officially on the market. The response was immediate and chaotic. Multiple typing indicators appeared and disappeared as they apparently started and abandoned responses. Finally, Emma's message came through. Mom, this feels very sudden. Can we please talk about this as a family before you make any irreversible decisions? The cabin has been in our family for generations. I'm aware of the cabin's history, Emma. I'm also aware that none of you could be bothered to join me there for Christmas, despite months of planning and clear promises to attend. I sat alone at that dining table yesterday, surrounded by food no one ate and presents no one opened. At a certain point, one must recognize reality. My unusually direct response was met with momentary silence. Then Daniel replied, Mom, I know Christmas didn't work out as planned, and I'm truly sorry about that. But selling our family legacy because of one disappointing holiday seems extreme. We all love the cabin. Do you? I typed, a lifetime of restrained emotions finally finding release. When was the last time any of you visited without me practically begging? Emma, you haven't been up since last Christmas. Daniel, your last visit was Memorial Day weekend, and you spent most of it on work calls. Lisa, it's been almost 2 years since you've set foot in the place you claim to love so much. More typing indicators, more false starts. Then Lisa. Mom, we've all been so busy with work and life. You know how crazy things get. But that doesn't mean we don't cherish the cabin and all the memories we have there. Cherishing memories. Doesn't pay property taxes or heating bills, Lisa. This crazy busy life you all lead has left me maintaining a property that sits empty most of the year, waiting for visits that rarely materialize. I've decided to use the proceeds from the sale to secure my own future instead. Emma, always the lawyer, tried a different approach. Mom, we understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. What if we worked out a schedule, each of us committing to specific weeks at the cabin throughout the year? We could even help with the expenses moving forward. That's a generous offer, Emma. Where was this concern last week when I was preparing for Christmas alone? Or yesterday, when I called Daniel twice and got no answer until he was already celebrating elsewhere? Actions speak louder than words. As I taught all of you growing up, your actions have been speaking clearly for years. I've finally started listening. Daniel's response came quickly. This isn't fair, Mom. One mistake doesn't erase a lifetime of family history. We're all juggling, demanding careers and complicated lives. Sometimes things fall through the cracks. I wasn't aware that Christmas with your widowed mother was something that could fall through the cracks, Daniel. Thank you for the clarification. The conversation continued in this vein for another hour, my children cycling through strategies, guilt, reason, bargaining, even anger, trying to dissuade me from a decision they clearly saw as punitive rather than practical. I remained calm but firm, neither lashing out nor backing down. Finally, sensing they were making no headway, Emma made one last appeal. Mom, will you at least give us a chance to say goodbye to the place? Can we come up this weekend, all of us together, to talk about this face-to-face? I considered the request. Part of me suspected this was simply another tactic, that they believed they could change my mind if only they could get me in person, appeal to my sentimentality, perhaps even cry those tears that had swayed me so many times throughout their childhoods. But another part recognized that regardless of their motives, they deserved the opportunity to say goodbye to a place that, however neglected, did hold significant memories for all of us. You're welcome to come this weekend, I replied finally. The cabin will be photographed tomorrow, but the listing won't go live until next week. Be aware that my decision is made. This visit would be about closure, not negotiation. A flurry of responses followed. Confirmation they would all arrive Friday evening, requests for favorite meals, questions about sleeping arrangements now that some bedrooms were being cleared out. I answered matter-of-factly, neither encouraging nor discoursing their sudden enthusiasm for family time at the cabin. When the conversation finally ended, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun begin its early winter descent. The lake stretched before me, a sheet of pristine white, broken only by the dark silhouettes of winter bare trees on the far shore. How many sunsets had I watched from this spot? How many conversations with Jack had taken place on this very swing, planning our future, discussing the children, dreaming dreams that now would never come to pass. I should have felt sadness, perhaps even doubt about my decision to sell this repository of memories. Instead, I felt a growing sense of rightness, of pieces falling into their proper places. The memories would remain with me regardless of who owned the deed to this property. What I needed now, in this chapter of my life, was not a shrine to the past, but a foundation for my future. The photographer arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, a cheerful woman in her 30s named Vanessa, who clearly knew her craft. She moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, setting up tripods and adjusting blinds to capture the perfect light in each room. I trailed behind her, straightening pillows and removing personal items from view. The framed school photos of my grandchildren, Jack's reading glasses I'd never had the heart to put away, the collection of painted rocks my children had created over summers at the lake. This property is going to photograph beautifully, Vanessa commented as she adjusted her camera settings in the main living area. The natural light, the original woodwork, that stunning stone fireplace. Buyers will be falling over themselves to make offers. It's been well loved, I replied, running my hand along the smooth pine mantel where generations of Christmas stockings had hung. May I ask why you're selling? Most people hold on to lakefront properties like this with both hands, especially ones with such character. I considered giving her the polite, sanitized version, downsizing, simplifying, the practical challenges of maintaining a second home at my age. Instead, I found myself offering the truth. My children don't come anymore. I spent Christmas here alone, and it made me realize I'm preserving something that no longer serves its purpose. Vanessa lowered her camera, her professional demeanor softening. I'm sorry to hear that. Family places like this are special because of the people, aren't they? Not just the structure. Exactly. Without the family, it's just an expensive building that consumes resources I could use elsewhere. She nodded thoughtfully before returning to her work, capturing angles that showcased the cabin's best features while minimizing its few flaws. The water stain on the kitchen ceiling from last spring's leak, the worn carpet on the stairs that I'd meant to replace for years. When she finished, Vanessa showed me some of the preliminary shots on her camera's display. Even without editing, the images were striking. The cabin bathed in winter light, the frozen lake visible through multiple windows, the cozy corners and charming details that made the property unique. She had captured not just a house, but a feeling, a sense of warmth and history that transcended the physical space. These are wonderful, I said, surprised by the lump forming in my throat. You've made it look exactly as I've always seen it. That's the highest compliment, she replied with a smile. The edited photos will be even better. Rachel should have them by tomorrow afternoon, and she mentioned wanting to list before the weekend to catch the New Year's browsers. After Vanessa left, I continued my methodical sorting of the cabin's contents. The kitchen cabinets yielded decades of accumulated items, mismatched mugs collected from various family trips, the children's plastic cups with faded cartoon characters, the special occasion china we used only for holiday meals. Each object carried memories, some sharp, enough to draw blood if handled carelessly. I created 3 distinct piles: items to keep and move to my primary home, things to sell with the cabin as furnishings, and objects to donate or discard. The decisions weren't always easy, but I approached them with the same practical mindset that had guided my teaching career. Sentimentality could be honored without keeping every physical reminder of the past. By late afternoon, I had worked through most of the common areas and started on the bedrooms. Emma's room still contained posters from her teenage years, bands, long since disbanded, movie heartthrobs now middle-aged. Daniel's shelves held his collection of fishing lures and the model airplanes he'd built with Jack during rainy days at the lake. Lisa's room remained the most unchanged, still decorated in the purple and silver color scheme she'd insisted on for her 16th birthday, her bulletin board crowded with faded photographs and mementos from her high school years. I sat on Lisa's bed, holding a stuffed otter she'd won at the county fair when she was 12. Jack had spent nearly $50 on the ring toss game before she finally succeeded, her triumphant squeal drawing attention from everyone nearby. She'd named the otter Captain McFuzzy and brought it to the cabin every summer until college, when suddenly such childish attachments became embarrassing. Should I pack it for her? Would she even want this relic of her childhood? Or would it join the many gifts I'd given her over the years, acknowledged politely then tucked away in closets or donation bags? The uncertainty itself was answer enough. I placed Captain McFuzzy in the sell with cabin pile. Perhaps some other child would cherish him in the years to come. My phone rang as I was finishing with Lisa's room. Rachel's name flashed on the screen and I answered, expecting an update on the listing process. "Margaret, I hope I'm not interrupting your packing," she began, an unusual hesitancy in her typically confident tone. "Not at all. I'm just sorting through the children's old rooms. What can I do for you?" "Well, this is a bit unorthodox, but I've received an inquiry about your property already. One of my colleagues mentioned to a client that a historic cabin on Pinehaven Lake would be coming on the market soon, and apparently the description alone was enough to generate serious interest. I sat down on the edge of Lisa's bed, surprised. But there aren't even photos listed yet. How could anyone be interested based on just a description? That's what makes lakefront properties in Pinehaven so valuable. They rarely come available, and when they do, they're often sold before they're officially listed. This particular interested party is a developer who's been acquiring properties on the North Shore. Your cabin would complete a significant stretch they're hoping to develop. A developer. Something cold settled in my stomach at the word. I had imagined selling to a family, perhaps one with young children who would create their own memories here, honor the spirit of the place while making it their own. Not bulldozers and construction equipment tearing down the hand-hewn beams my grandfather had placed. What kind of development? I asked, working to keep my voice neutral. Rachel's pause told me she anticipated my reaction. A luxury resort and condominium complex. Their vision is to transform that section of the lake into a high-end vacation destination. The plans I've seen include a marina, a restaurant overlooking the water, and about 24 upscale townhomes, which would require demolishing the existing cabins, I concluded. Yes, I'm afraid so. The structures don't figure into their plans. She cleared her throat. Margaret, I should mention that they're prepared to make an extremely competitive offer, well above market value, if you're willing to sell directly to them without listing publicly. They understand the unique opportunity your property represents. The practical side of me recognized the financial wisdom in such an arrangement. A sale above market value, without the hassle of showings or the uncertainty of the traditional listing process. The emotional side recoiled at the thought of the cabin, Jack's carefully maintained stone fireplace, the height markers tracked on the kitchen doorframe, the initials carved into the ancient oak at the property line, reduced to rubble to make way for luxury condominiums. How much? I heard myself ask, the teacher in me needing all the facts before making a decision. Rachel named a figure that momentarily stole my breath, nearly double the already substantial market value she had estimated in her earlier analysis. They're motivated, she added unnecessarily, and they're prepared to close quickly with minimal contingencies. I need to think about this, I said. My children are coming this weekend for one last visit to the cabin. I'd like to have that time before making any decisions. Of course, Rachel replied, professional as always despite what must have been disappointment at the delayed commission. Just keep in mind that an offer like this is extraordinary, even in the current market. I wouldn't want you to miss this opportunity if it aligns with your goals. After we hung up, I wandered through the cabin, seeing it now through the cold, calculating eyes of a developer. Not a home, but a parcel. Not memories, but square footage. Not history, but opportunity. The walls that had witnessed 5 decades of my life reduced to obstacles in the path of progress, structures to be demolished rather than spaces to be inhabited. I made tea and carried it to the porch swing, wrapping myself in Jack's old cardigan, against the winter chill. The lake stretched before me, pristine and powerful in its frozen stillness. How many summer mornings had I watched the mist rise from its surface at dawn? How many evenings had I marveled at the stars reflected in its dark waters? The idea that this view might soon belong to wealthy strangers sipping cocktails on resort balconies stirred something protective in me. Yet wasn't that precisely what I had decided just yesterday? That the cabin would belong to strangers? That I would convert this repository of memories into financial security for my remaining years? The developer's offer simply accelerated and amplified that decision. The outcome would be the same, only the scale would differ. Or would it? I had imagined the cabin passing to a family who would honor its spirit, perhaps create their own height chart on the kitchen doorframe, their own traditions around the dining table that had hosted nearly 50 Christmases. The developer's vision erased not just my family's history, but the cabin itself, replacing handcrafted authenticity with manufactured luxury. Would the children care? They claimed to cherish the cabin, yet their actions told a different story. Would they truly mourn its loss? Or only the idea of it? The knowledge that it existed as a backup plan? A retreat available whenever they deigned to remember its existence? The questions circled without resolution as darkness fell. I returned. Inside, lit the fire more for comfort than warmth, and continued my sorting by its flickering light. In the study, I found the box of Jack's fishing gear I hadn't been able to part with after his death. The hand-tied flies he'd created during winter evenings, the tackle box organized with his characteristic precision, the lucky cap he insisted on wearing despite its increasingly battered appearance. Daniel had shown interest in these items after the funeral, asking if he could have his father's fishing equipment someday. That someday had never materialized, his visits to the cabin growing more infrequent as his career consumed him. Would this connection to his father suddenly become precious once it was threatened with loss? Or would it remain a vague someday intention, forever deferred? I placed the fishing gear in the keep pile, resolving to offer it to Daniel regardless of his reaction to the sale. Some connections deserved preservation, even when others were severed. By midnight, exhaustion overtook me. I left the study half-sorted and retreated to my bedroom, falling into a restless sleep filled with disjointed dreams, Jack trying to tell me something important I couldn't quite hear. The children as they had been in childhood, laughing and racing toward the lake. The cabin itself somehow alive and breathing, its walls expanding and contracting like lungs. I woke before dawn, feeling unrested but clearer in my purpose. Whatever decision I made about the developer's offer would come after this weekend, after giving my children the chance to say goodbye to the place that had shaped their early years. I owed them that much, despite the disappointments of recent days. The rest of the week passed in continued preparation, sorting belongings, deep cleaning spaces that had accumulated decades of lake dust and summer memories, preparing the guest rooms for their final use. Rachel called twice more, gently emphasizing the developer's eagerness to secure an answer, but accepted my insistence on waiting until after the family's visit. By Friday afternoon, the cabin was as ready as it would ever be. I had prepared each child's favorite meal for dinner: Emma's lasagna with homemade sauce, Daniel's grilled salmon with dill, Lisa's chicken piccata, uncertain which we would actually eat, but unwilling to prioritize one preference over the others. The refrigerator was stocked with their preferred beverages, the pantry with the snacks they had favored since childhood. Old habits of maternal accommodation died hard, it seemed. I was chopping vegetables for a salad when I heard the first car on the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Emma's SUV pull up, her husband Warren behind the wheel. The twins, Tyler and Lily, tumbled out almost before the vehicle stopped, 9-year-old bundles of energy after the long drive. Emma emerged more slowly, her expression impossible to read at this distance. Warren began unloading luggage, his movements efficient but without enthusiasm, a man fulfilling an obligation rather than beginning a cherished family weekend. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to greet them, stepping onto the porch just as the twins spotted me. "Grandma!" they shouted in unison, racing up the steps to collide with me in dual hugs that nearly knocked me off balance. Despite everything, their genuine joy at seeing me warmed something that had been cold since Christmas morning. "My goodness, you've both grown 3 inches since I saw you last," I said, holding them at arm's length to admire them properly. "And I see you're feeling much better after those Christmas fevers." A flicker of confusion crossed Tyler's face, quickly replaced by understanding as Emma shot him a warning look from the bottom of the stairs. So there had been no fevers, no legitimate reason for their absence on Christmas. Just another convenient excuse. Another lie told to spare feelings or avoid confrontation. "Mom," Emma said, climbing the steps to embrace me with careful affection. "The cabin looks wonderful. I'd forgotten how magical it is in winter." "Thank you for having us," Warren added, following with luggage in both hands, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. We had always had a cordial if distant relationship, his workaholic tendencies and urban sensibilities at odds with the rustic simplicity of lake life. I led them inside, where the twins immediately raced to explore as if confirming the cabin still contained all their favorite spots. Emma paused in the entryway, her gaze taking in the small changes, the missing photographs, the organized stack of boxes in the corner, the absence of the collection of beach glass that had always lined the windowsills. "You've really started packing," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, I have. The photographer came 2 days ago. The listing should go live early next week." I maintained the same neutral tone, neither apologizing for nor defending my decision. She nodded, seeming about to say more when her phone chimed with a notification. She checked it, then brightened. "That's Daniel. He just turned onto Lake Road. He'll be here in about 10 minutes. "Wonderful." Lisa texted that her flight was delayed, but she should arrive by dinner time. "I've prepared all your favorites so we can decide what to eat once everyone's here." Emma followed me to the kitchen, where I resumed my salad preparation. She moved around the familiar space with the ease of someone who had spent countless hours there, automatically reaching for the correct cabinet when I asked her to set the table, remembering which drawer held the good silverware we used for family dinners. "Mom," she began hesitantly, arranging napkins beside each plate. "I want you to know that I understand why you're upset about Christmas. It was wrong of us not to be here, especially after we promised we would come." I glanced up from my chopping, noting the careful phrasing, acknowledging my feelings without accepting responsibility, recognizing the broken promise without explaining the lie about sick children. "I appreciate that, Emma. But this isn't just about Christmas. It's about recognizing that this property no longer serves the purpose it once did for our family." She sighed, abandoning the table setting to lean against the counter beside me. "Is that really true, though? Or is it just that our visits have become less frequent than you'd like? Less frequent doesn't mean we don't value this place. Our lives are complicated now, with jobs and kids and 1,000 competing demands." "I understand complicated lives, Emma. I raised 3 children while teaching full-time and caring for your father through 2 major surgeries before his heart finally gave out. Complicated isn't new. What's changed is priority." The sound of another vehicle on the gravel prevented her response. Through the window, we watched Daniel's luxury sedan pull up beside Emma's SUV. He emerged alone, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, finishing a call before pocketing the device and retrieving his luggage from the trunk. "No Jen? Emma?" asked as he entered, referring to his wife of 3 years. Daniel shook his head, accepting my hug with one arm, still holding his briefcase with the other. She had a charity event she couldn't miss, junior league stuff. The unspoken reality hung in the air. Daniel's wife had once again opted out of family time at the cabin, prioritizing her social obligations over what should have been an important farewell weekend. From what little I knew of their relationship, gleaned through infrequent visits and holiday conversations, this pattern was well established. "Well, we're glad you could make it," I said, choosing not to comment on his wife's absence. "How was the drive up?" "Fine, though the county really needs to address the potholes on Lake Road. My suspension isn't what it used to be." He glanced around the living room, noticing the same changes Emma had. "So you're really going through with this? Selling our family cabin?" "Yes, Daniel, I am. In fact, I've already received an offer." Both my children stared at me in shock. "What? From who?" Daniel demanded. "The listing isn't even live yet." "A developer has expressed interest. They've been acquiring properties along this stretch of shoreline for a resort and condominium project." Emma's face paled. A developer? You mean someone who would tear down the cabin? That would be the plan, yes. They've made a very generous offer, significantly above market value. Daniel set his briefcase down with more force than necessary. Mom, you can't seriously be considering selling our family legacy to developers who would demolish it. This cabin has been in our family for 3 generations. I'm aware of the cabin's history, Daniel. I'm also aware that history must sometimes yield to present reality. What reality? He spread his arms, encompassing the well-maintained space around us. The reality that you're upset about one Christmas and are making a rash decision out of hurt feelings? I felt a flare of anger at his dismissive characterization, but kept my voice level. The reality that this property costs me nearly 1/3 of my annual income to maintain, while sitting empty most of the year. The reality that none of you have shown much interest in using it until it was threatened. The reality that, at 68, I need to make practical decisions about my financial security. If it's about money, we can help, Emma interjected. Between the 3 of us, we could certainly cover the expenses. And where was this offer of financial assistance last year when I mentioned the property tax increase? Or when the water heater needed replacing last spring? Or any of the dozen other times I've shouldered the burden of maintaining this place alone since your father died? They exchanged uncomfortable glances, neither having an adequate response. The conversation might have continued in this vein, had the twins not burst into the room at that moment, having completed their exploratory circuit of the cabin. "Uncle Daniel!" they exclaimed, launching themselves at their uncle, who managed to transform his irritation into a welcoming smile, with impressive speed. "Hey, Munchkins! How's 4th grade treating you?" The next hour passed in the superficial pleasantries of family gathering, catching up on school achievements and work developments, unpacking and settling into bedrooms, the twins dragging their uncle down to the frozen lakefront to show him the snow fort they had started building. I used the temporary respite to finish dinner preparations, my mind working through the conversation with my children. Their reactions had been predictable: dismay at the idea of selling to developers, immediate offers of financial assistance now that the threat was real, the implication that my decision stemmed from emotional reaction rather than rational assessment. What I hadn't seen was genuine remorse for the patterns that had led to this point, or real understanding of why the cabin no longer served its purpose for me. By 6 o'clock, Lisa still hadn't arrived. I tried calling her twice, receiving no answer. Emma attempted texting with the same result. We decided to start dinner without her, selecting the lasagna as our meal since it would be easiest to warm up later. We were halfway through dinner when headlights swept across the windows, announcing Lisa's arrival. Moments later, she burst through the door in a whirlwind of designer luggage and effusive apologies. "I'm so sorry. The flight was delayed, then the rental car company lost my reservation, and there's absolutely no cell service on half of Lake Road." She hugged me tightly, her expensive perfume enveloping us both. "The cabin looks amazing, Mom. Exactly as I remember it." I returned her embrace, noting the carefully casual designer outfit and immaculate makeup that suggested she had come directly from a business meeting rather than a delayed flight. "We're just having dinner. There's plenty left." Lisa greeted her siblings and the twins, declined Warren's offer to bring in her remaining luggage, and joined us at the table, accepting a heaping plate of lasagna with thanks. "Have I missed anything important?" she asked between bites. "Just that Mom has already received an offer on the cabin from developers who want to tear it down and build condos," Daniel replied dryly. Lisa's fork clattered against her plate. "What? Mom, you wouldn't really sell to developers, would you?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The screen displayed Rachel's name, and I excused myself to answer in the kitchen, grateful for the momentary escape from the tension at the table. "Margaret, I apologize for calling in the evening, but the developer has been quite insistent," Rachel began. "They've increased their offer by another 15% and are requesting an answer by Monday morning." The new figure she quoted was staggering, nearly triple my initial estimate of the cabin's worth. A sum that would not only secure my retirement, but allow for the kind of financial freedom I had never imagined possible. "Tell them I'll have an answer after the weekend, as we agreed," I replied. "My family is here now, and I won't be rushed into a decision before they've had their time to say goodbye." "I understand completely. Enjoy your weekend with your family. I'll hold them off until Monday." When I returned to the dining room, 3 expectant faces turned toward me. "The developer has increased their offer," I said, resuming my seat. "They'd like an answer by Monday morning." "And what are you going to tell them?" Lisa asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I haven't decided yet." "Mom, you can't seriously be considering it," Emma protested. "This place is irreplaceable. The memories we've made here, memories that seem to matter far more in retrospect than they did last week when you all had better things to do than spend Christmas with me," I interrupted, surprising even myself with the sharpness in my tone. A heavy silence fell over the table. Even the twins, usually oblivious to adult tensions, sensed the shift in atmosphere and became unusually quiet, focusing intently on their dessert. "Is that what this is about?" Daniel finally asked. "Punishing us for missing Christmas." I set down my fork deliberately, surveying my 3 adult children. "No, Daniel. This is about me making a practical decision based on my current circumstances and needs, not preserving a property that has become more burden than joy. But I won't pretend that spending Christmas alone in this house wasn't clarifying. It showed me exactly where I and this cabin rank in your list of priorities." "That's not fair," Lisa protested. "One holiday doesn't define how we feel about this place or about you." "One holiday, no. But this has been a pattern for years. The cabin has become like a favorite childhood toy that you no longer play with but can't bear to give away. It sits on a shelf, neglected but comforting in its familiarity. Its mere existence a source of nostalgia even as it gathers dust." Warren cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until the children are in bed." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his suggestion. "You're right. This isn't a conversation for young ears." The remainder of dinner passed in strained small talk. Emma's law firm's latest high-profile case, Daniel's upcoming product launch, Lisa's recent business trip to Singapore. The children, sensing the tension, asked to be excused as soon as they finished their ice cream, retreating to the living room with their tablets. As we cleared the table, Lisa approached me at the sink, her voice lowered. "Mom, we really need to talk about this. All of us, as a family." "I agree. Once the twins are settled, we'll have that conversation." Emma supervised the twins' bedtime routine while the rest of us finished cleaning up dinner. By 9 o'clock, we gathered in the living room, the fire crackling in the grate, casting flickering shadows across faces I had known from their first moments of existence. "Before we begin," I said, settling into Jack's old armchair, "I want to make something clear. I didn't make this decision lightly or in a moment of emotional reaction. I've been considering it for over a year, weighing the practical realities against the sentimental attachments. Christmas was the tipping point, not the cause." My children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Emma, always the spokesperson in difficult situations, leaned forward on the sofa. "We understand that, Mom, and we recognize that maintaining this place has been a financial strain on you. That's why we want to help. Between the 3 of us, we can easily cover the expenses moving forward. You wouldn't have to worry about it anymore." "But I would still have a property sitting empty most of the year, its purpose unfulfilled. This cabin was meant to be a gathering place, a home where our family could reconnect and maintain our bonds across generations. It hasn't served that purpose for a long time." "We can change that," Lisa insisted. "We can commit to using it more regularly, to bringing our families here as Dad would have wanted." Promises are easy to make in moments of potential loss, I replied gently. But your lives are established elsewhere now. Your priorities are clear, and they don't include regular trips to a remote cabin, no matter how beloved it might be in theory. Daniel, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. What if we bought it from you? Not at the developer's inflated price, obviously, but at a fair market value. That would give you the financial security you need while keeping the cabin in. The family. I considered his suggestion. It was reasonable on the surface, a compromise that addressed my financial concerns while preserving the cabin for future generations. Yet something about it felt hollow, an expensive Band-Aid applied to a much deeper wound. And who would own it? I asked. Would you split it equally? Would you establish a formal arrangement for its use and maintenance? Would you manage the inevitable conflicts when two of you want to use it for the same holiday? The three of them looked at each other, clearly not having thought through these practical details. We'd figure it out, Emma said with more confidence than seemed warranted. People co-own vacation properties all the time. They do. And families fracture over them with surprising regularity. I've watched it happen to friends with shared lakefront cottages, siblings who haven't spoken in years because of disagreements, over upkeep costs or scheduling conflicts. We wouldn't let that happen, Lisa protested. You say that now, but life has a way of complicating even the best intentions. Job changes, financial setbacks, family dynamics, all constrain the most carefully constructed arrangements. Warren, who had been observing silently from the corner, cleared his throat. If I may offer an outside perspective, he began, glancing at Emma for permission to enter what had become an increasingly tense family discussion. It seems to me that this conversation is oscillating between two distinct issues: the practical matter of the cabin's ownership and the emotional matter of what it represents to each of you. I nodded, appreciating his insight. That's precisely it, Warren. The cabin has become a symbol, its importance elevated by nostalgia, and the threat of loss in a way that wasn't reflected in your actual use of it when it was simply available. That's not entirely fair, Daniel objected. We all lead busy lives. That doesn't mean we don't value this place. Value is demonstrated through action, Daniel, not sentiment. When's the last time any of you came here without my explicit invitation? When's the last time one of you called just to check if the roof was holding up after a major storm, or to see if I needed help opening the cabin for the season? Their silence was answer enough. The developer's offer would set me up financially for the rest of my life, I continued, softening my tone. It would allow me to travel, to pursue interests I've set aside for decades, to live without financial anxiety for the first time since your father died. And in exchange, they would destroy everything this place has ever meant to our family, Emma said quietly, tears gathering in her eyes. The dock where Dad taught us to fish, the porch where we roasted marshmallows during summer storms, the beach where we built those ridiculous sand mermaids Lisa was so obsessed with. Lisa smiled faintly at the memory. They weren't ridiculous. They were artistic. They had seaweed hair and pinecone bikinis, Daniel teased, momentarily lightening the mood. For a fleeting instant, I glimpsed the siblings they had once been, connected, affectionate, sharing jokes and memories that bound them together, even as their individual lives pulled them in different directions. It was precisely this connection I had hoped the cabin would continue to foster into their adulthood. The bond I had tried to maintain through increasingly strained family holidays and sparsely attended summer gatherings. I haven't made my final decision yet, I said, watching the flicker of hope cross their faces. That's why I wanted this weekend together, to give us all a chance to say what needs to be said, to acknowledge what this place has meant and what it might still mean going forward. So you might not sell to the developers? Lisa asked cautiously. I will likely still sell, but to whom and under what conditions remains to be determined. What I know for certain is that I can no longer bear the financial and emotional burden of maintaining a property that serves primarily as a repository for memories, rather than a living, breathing part of our present. Warren glanced at his watch. It's getting late, and this has been an emotionally taxing conversation for everyone. Perhaps we should continue in the morning when we're all fresher. Grateful for his practical suggestion, I nodded. That seems wise. We have the entire weekend ahead of us. As we prepared for bed, moving through the familiar nighttime routines in a house that had sheltered decades of such moments, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. The conversation had gone much as I had expected. Initial shock, offers of financial assistance, appeals to nostalgia, and the unspoken assumption that I would ultimately relent in the face of their united front. What they didn't yet understand was that something fundamental had shifted within me during those solitary Christmas hours. I had glimpsed a future beyond the narrow role of family matriarch, caretaker of traditions and properties that no longer served their intended purpose. I had seen myself not as the keeper of the past, but as a woman with years still to live, adventures still to experience, a life still very much in progress rather than winding down. Whether they would come to understand, this transformation remained to be seen. But as I lay in bed, listening to the familiar creak of the cabin settling around me, I knew with increasing certainty that whatever decision I made about the property, it would be guided by this new vision of myself and my future, not by the comfortable patterns of my past. Morning arrived with a clarity unique to winter at the lake. Sunlight refracting through frost-etched windows, casting prismatic patterns across the worn wooden floors. I had risen before dawn, a lifetime habit that even retirement hadn't broken, and now sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, watching the day emerge over the frozen expanse outside. The cabin felt different this morning, as if our conversation last night had somehow altered its physical presence. The walls that had witnessed 5 decades of my life seemed to hold their breath, waiting to learn their fate. Would they stand for another generation, sheltering new families and witnessing new memories? Or would they fall to make way for sleek condominiums with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances? The sound of small feet on the stairs broke my reverie. Tyler appeared in the kitchen doorway, rumpled from sleep, his dinosaur pajamas, a startling reminder of childhood amidst these adult considerations. "Morning, Grandma?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Is there hot chocolate?" "There certainly can be," I replied, rising to retrieve the ingredients. This was one of our traditions, hot chocolate with miniature marshmallows on winter mornings at the cabin. I had stocked the pantry accordingly, even as I planned to sell the place. Some habits proved harder to break than others. As I warmed milk on the ancient gas stove, Tyler climbed onto a kitchen chair, his elbows propped on the table in a posture so reminiscent of Emma at that age that my chest tightened momentarily. "Mom says you're selling the cabin," he said, his voice matter-of-fact in the way only children can manage when discussing life-altering events. I measured cocoa powder carefully before answering. "I'm considering it, yes." "Because we didn't come for Christmas?" I turned to look at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "That's part of it, but not the whole reason. Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes as their lives change." He accepted this with a solemn nod. "If you sell it, where will we have hot chocolate in the winter?" Such a simple question, yet it pierced straight to the heart of the matter. Where indeed would these small traditions continue? Would Emma make hot chocolate at home on winter mornings? Or was this a cabin-specific ritual, one that would vanish along with the property itself? "We could have hot chocolate anywhere," I said, setting the steaming mug before him, miniature marshmallows already beginning to melt into a creamy swirl. "Traditions aren't about places, Tyler. They're about people and the special things they do together." He considered this while taking a cautious sip. "But it wouldn't be the same." "No," I agreed, sitting beside him with my coffee. It wouldn't be exactly the same, but different doesn't always mean worse. We sat in companionable silence as the house gradually awakened around us. Lily appeared next, followed by Emma and Warren, and eventually Daniel and Lisa, each gravitating to the kitchen in various states of morning dishevelment. I prepared breakfast, Jack's famous sourdough pancakes, a recipe he had perfected over decades of cabin weekends, while the family settled around the table. The conversation remained carefully neutral, focusing on the day's activities rather than returning to last night's difficult discussion. Emma suggested a walk along the lakeshore. Daniel mentioned checking that the boat dock had been properly secured for winter. Lisa wondered if the old sleds were still in the garage. Everyday plans made in the shadow of decisions that would determine whether such days would ever happen again. After breakfast, we bundled up against the cold and ventured out as a group. The twins raced ahead, their bright winter jackets like tropical birds against the monochrome landscape. The rest of us followed more sedately, breath clouding in the frigid air, boots crunching on snow that sparkled with diamond brilliance under the morning sun. The frozen lake stretched before us, a vast white plain bordered by snow-laden pines, and distant cabins, most unoccupied until summer. We walked along the shoreline where generations of Wilsons had swum, fished, and boated. I found myself cataloging memories with each step. Here was where Jack had taught Daniel to skip stones. There was where Lisa had built her elaborate sand sculptures. Beyond was the fallen log where Emma had read book after book during her teenage years. "It's so peaceful," Emma said, falling into step beside me as the others moved ahead. "I forget how quiet it is here. How different from the city." "That's what your father loved most about it," I replied. "He said the silence reset something essential in him." She nodded, her gloved hands deep in her pockets. "I remember him sitting on the dock for hours sometimes, just looking at the water. As a kid, I thought he was wasting time. Now I understand he was saving his sanity." We walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds our footsteps and the distant laughter of the twins, who had convinced Daniel to help them build a snowman near the water's edge. "Mom," Emma began hesitantly, "I want to apologize for Christmas. Really apologize, not just acknowledge that you were upset. We should have been here. The twins weren't sick. We just got caught up in Warren's office party and the neighborhood gift exchange, and it seemed easier to stay home than make the drive up." The admission, so simple yet clearly difficult for her, loosened something tight in my chest. "Thank you for being honest with me. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about value being demonstrated through action, not sentiment. You were right. We say the cabin matters to us, but our behavior tells a different story." I glanced at her, seeing not the accomplished attorney or the sometimes distant daughter, but the thoughtful child who had always tried to understand the world around her in its fullest complexity. "It's human nature," I said. "We often don't appreciate what we have until it's threatened. The cabin became background music in your lives, present but unnoticed, taken for granted until the moment it might stop playing. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it understandable. Your lives are full, Emma. I don't begrudge you that. What bothered me wasn't that you couldn't come for every holiday or summer weekend. It was the pattern of promises made, and broken, of the cabin becoming an obligation rather than a joy." She kicked at a drift of snow, sending a powder plume into the air. "We talked about it last night after you went to bed. The three of us, I mean. About buying the cabin from you, about making a real plan for its use and maintenance. And it's complicated. Daniel thinks we should form an LLC to own it jointly. Lisa is concerned about the tax implications. I'm worried about how we'd manage scheduling conflicts when we all want to use it for the same holidays." She sighed. "It's exactly as you predicted. The practical realities are messy, even when the intention is clear." I nodded, unsurprised. Joint ownership works best when all parties have similar financial situations, geographic proximity, and family dynamics. You three are scattered across the country, with different income levels and family responsibilities. But that doesn't mean we should just give up and let some developer tear it down, she protested. There has to be a middle path. Ahead of us, the twins had completed their snowman and were now engaged in what appeared to be an impromptu snow angel competition, supervised by a laughing Lisa. Daniel and Warren stood a short distance away, deep in conversation, their serious, expressions visible even at this distance. Perhaps there is, I said. But it would require genuine commitment, not just financial investment, but emotional investment as well. Regular use, shared responsibilities, clear communication about expectations. We can do that, Emma insisted. We're adults. We can create systems, set schedules, divide tasks. You certainly could. The question is whether you would, not just in this moment of potential loss, but consistently, year after year, as your lives continue to evolve and new demands emerge. She had no immediate answer to this, and we walked in thoughtful silence until we reached the point where the shoreline curved around a small bay. The twins were tired by now, their initial energy flagging in the cold. We turned back toward the cabin, our family group naturally reforming as we retraced our steps. Daniel fell into step on my other side, his expression troubled. Warren tells me you received an increased offer from the developer. He seems to think you should take it. Warren has always been practical about financial matters, I replied carefully. He mentioned a number that seems implausible. Is it really that much? I quoted the latest offer, watching Daniel's eyebrows rise in astonishment. His financial acumen, honed through years in the tech industry, immediately recognized the exceptional nature of the proposition. That's significantly above market value, he said, even accounting for the developer's obvious motivation and the lakefront location. Yes, it is. Mom, that kind of financial cushion would completely transform your retirement. You could travel, move closer to one of us if you wanted, never worry about healthcare costs or unexpected expenses. I'm aware of the implications, Daniel. He looked troubled, but you're still hesitating. I'm allowing space for all considerations, not just financial ones. This weekend is part of that process. By the time we returned to the cabin, cheeks, flushed with cold and feet stamping snow from boots on the porch, the morning had slipped away. I prepared lunch while the others warmed up by the fire, the conversation flowing more naturally now that the initial shock of my announcement had been absorbed. After lunch, Daniel mentioned wanting to check the shed where the fishing equipment was stored. I offered him the key, knowing he would find his father's tackle box and handmade flies among the items I had decided to keep regardless of the cabin's fate. Lisa volunteered to help me with the dishes, an uncharacteristic offer that signaled her desire for a private conversation. Once the others had dispersed, Emma and Warren taking the twins for an afternoon nap, Daniel heading to the shed, she spoke while drying a serving platter. I've been the worst about visiting, haven't I? Out of all of us. Her directness caught me off guard. Lisa had always been my most evasive child, skilled at deflecting uncomfortable truths through charm and distraction. You're certainly the farthest away geographically, I said, neither confirming nor denying her assessment. That's a diplomatic non-answer. She set down the platter and faced me. Mom, I haven't been here in almost 2 years. I've canceled 3 planned visits in that time. I'm the problem child when it comes to the cabin, and we both know it. I turned off the water and dried my hands, giving her my full attention. Distance makes regular visits more challenging, Lisa. I've always understood that. Distance is an excuse. Denver to Minneapolis isn't exactly crossing oceans. I could have come more often if I'd made it a priority. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed protectively across her chest. The truth is, the cabin makes me sad now. Everything here reminds me of Dad, of how things were when we were all together. Sometimes it's easier to stay away than to face those memories. Her admission surprised me. Of my 3 children, Lisa had always seemed the least affected by Jack's death, at least outwardly. She had returned to college just days after the funeral, immersing herself in campus activities and rarely speaking of her father in the years that followed. "I had no idea you felt that way," I said softly. "Because I never told you. It was easier to claim work commitments or scheduling conflicts than to admit I was avoiding the place that most reminds me of him." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "But that's not fair to you. You've been maintaining this place, keeping his memory alive, while I've been running from it." I reached for her hand, finding it cold despite the warm kitchen. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule or conform to expectations, Lisa. We each find our own way through it. But my way has hurt you. Left you alone at Christmas, bearing the burden of this place by yourself." "Yes," I acknowledged, seeing no purpose in denying the truth. "It has been difficult at times. But I need you to understand something important. My decision to sell isn't about punishing any of you for not visiting enough. It's about recognizing that this chapter of our family's story has concluded, and it's time to begin a new one." She wiped at a stray tear with the back of her hand. "But what if we're not ready for it to end? Then you need to demonstrate that through more than words or momentary distress. You need to show me, through actions and commitments, that the cabin still serves a meaningful purpose in our family's life." Lisa nodded slowly, her natural optimism reasserting itself. "We can do that. We've already started talking about a concrete plan. Daniel's idea for an LLC, a formal agreement about usage and expenses. Emma's working on a draft this afternoon. I'm glad to hear you're thinking practically. That's an essential first step. But you're still not convinced." I smiled gently. "Let's just say I'm reserving judgment until I see how this weekend unfolds and what plans emerge from your discussions. I've lived long enough to know that intentions, however sincere, don't always translate into sustained action." We finished the dishes in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Afterward, Lisa retrieved her laptop from her room, mentioning a few work emails she needed to address. I took the opportunity to step outside alone, needing a moment of solitude to process the morning's conversations. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered yard, the temperature beginning to drop as day progressed toward evening. I walked to the old oak tree at the property's edge, its massive trunk scarred with generations of carved initials, Jack's and mine from our early dating years, the children's awkward attempts, even my father's fading mark from decades before. I traced the rough heart containing J+M with gloved fingers, remembering the summer evening when Jack had carved it, both of us still in our 20s, our lives stretching before us with limitless possibility. How could we have known then that our time together would be cut short? That I would stand here 40 years later, contemplating the sale of the place that had been so central to our shared dreams? "Mom." I turned to find Daniel approaching, his father's tackle box in his hands, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "You kept his fishing gear," he said, holding the box like something precious. "Of course. I thought you might want it, regardless of what happens with the cabin." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I found the flies he was working on that last Christmas. The green and brown ones, he said, were perfect for early spring bass. He was so proud of those. He studied for months to get the pattern just right." Daniel ran his fingers along the weathered box. "I should have asked for these years ago. Should have continued the tradition." "It's not too late to start," I said gently. "Even if the cabin is sold, where would I fish?" "There are other lakes, Daniel. Other docks from which to cast a line. The skill and the memory aren't tied to this specific shore." He looked unconvinced. "It wouldn't be the same." "No, it wouldn't. But different isn't always worse, as I told Tyler this morning. Sometimes different is just different. A new chapter rather than a conclusion." We stood together in the fading afternoon light, the tackle box between us symbolizing both what had been lost and what might still be preserved, depending on the choices we made in the days ahead. Back inside, the cabin hummed with activity. The twins, refreshed from their nap, were helping Emma string popcorn for a garland, a belated Christmas decoration they insisted the tree needed. Lisa sat cross-legged on the floor, untangling a string of lights, while Warren stoked the fire to combat the gathering evening chill. The scene struck me with unexpected force. My family engaged in simple domestic activities, their faces lit by firelight, the cabin serving its intended purpose as a gathering place, a shelter against literal and metaphorical cold. For a moment, I could almost believe that this was not a farewell weekend, but simply another in an unbroken string of family gatherings that would continue indefinitely into the future. But reality intruded in small ways. Daniel checking his phone for work messages, Lisa periodically typing responses to emails, Warren glancing at his watch as if mentally calculating the hours until their departure on Sunday. The modern world with its constant demands and distractions never fully receded, even here in this deliberately rustic retreat. Dinner that evening was Daniel's favorite: grilled salmon with dill sauce, roasted potatoes, and fresh bread I had baked that morning. The conversation remained carefully light, focusing on the twins' school activities, Lisa's recent travels, and Daniel's new home automation system. By unspoken agreement, the question of the cabin's fate was set aside, allowing us one meal untainted by difficult discussions. After the twins were tucked in for the night, however, the adult conversation inevitably returned to the matter at hand. Emma produced a laptop containing the draft agreement she had been working on throughout the afternoon, a detailed proposal for joint ownership of the cabin, complete with maintenance schedules, usage priorities, and financial obligations. "We've been discussing this all day," she explained, turning the screen so I could see the document. "It's still rough, but it outlines how we could make this work as co-owners." I scanned the document, impressed despite myself by its thoroughness. Emma's legal training was evident in the precise language and comprehensive approach to potential conflicts. Each child would contribute equally to a maintenance fund. Usage would be allocated through a rotating priority system for holidays and summer weekends. Major decisions about renovations or repairs would require unanimous agreement. "This is well constructed," I acknowledged, passing the laptop back to her. "You've clearly put significant thought into the practical aspects." "We have," Lisa said eagerly. "We spent hours working through the potential issues, scheduling conflicts, maintenance responsibilities, financial contributions. We're committed to making this work." Daniel nodded in agreement. "The LLC structure protects everyone's interests while creating a formal framework for decision-making. It's how many families successfully manage shared vacation properties." I looked at my 3 children, their faces alight with the conviction that they had solved the problem, found the solution that would satisfy everyone's needs. Preserve the cabin for future generations while relieving me of the financial and practical burdens of its maintenance. "It's an excellent start," I said carefully, "but there's something fundamental missing from this plan." Their expressions shifted from optimism to confusion. "What's missing?" Emma asked, glancing back at her document as if searching for an overlooked clause. "Purpose," I replied simply. "What is the cabin for in your lives now? Not just as a concept or an inheritance, but as a living, breathing place that requires time and presence to justify its existence?" "It's for family gatherings," Lisa answered immediately. "Holidays, summer vacations, weekend getaways." "When was the last time any of you used it that way, without my prompting or planning? When was the last time one of you called and said, 'Mom, I'd like to bring the family to the cabin next weekend'?" Silence greeted my questions. The harsh truth is that none of you have demonstrated through your actions that the cabin serves an essential purpose in your current lives. You visit, dutifully when pressed, usually for major holidays, but rarely of your own initiative. You express love for the place in the abstract, but your choices suggest it's a peripheral concern at best. That can change, Emma insisted. This agreement is our commitment to change that pattern. Perhaps it can, I conceded, but I need more than a document to be convinced. I need to see evidence that this place truly matters in the rhythms of your daily lives, not just in moments of threatened loss. Warren, who had been listening quietly from his corner of the sofa, finally spoke. Margaret, if I may, what would constitute sufficient evidence for you? What would you need to see to believe that their commitment is genuine? It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself since the developer's offer arrived. What would convince me that selling the cabin would be a mistake? What demonstration of commitment would outweigh the financial security and new possibilities offered by the developer's substantial bid? I would need to see sustained engagement, not just promises, I said after a moment's reflection. Regular. Visits initiated by you, not by me. Willing participation in its maintenance and care. Evidence that the cabin serves a meaningful purpose in your actual lives, not just in nostalgic memory or abstract intention. And how long would that take? Daniel asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. The developer wants an answer. By Monday. We can't demonstrate sustained engagement in less than 2 days. No, you can't, I agreed. Which is why this decision is so difficult. I'm weighing a bird in hand, the developer's concrete offer, against birds in bush. Your promises of future engagement that contradict established patterns. Lisa leaned forward, her expression earnest. Mom, what if we asked the developer for more time? Maybe a month or 2? That would give us the chance to demonstrate our commitment through actions, not just words. I considered this suggestion. It had merit, assuming the developer would agree to delay their decision. A month or 2 wouldn't prove sustained engagement in the strictest sense, but it might provide enough evidence of sincere intent to tip the scales. I can ask Rachel if they would consider a delayed decision, I said finally, but I can't promise they'll agree. Their offer is contingent on acquiring all the properties in this section of shoreline. If they've secured agreements with other owners, they may not be willing to wait on our decision. It's worth trying, Emma urged. All we're asking for is a chance to show you that we're serious about this commitment. I nodded, thinking through the implications. I'll call Rachel tomorrow morning. But I want to be clear about something. If we secure this extension, I'll be watching closely to see whether your actions align with your words. Weekend visits, when convenient, aren't enough. I need to see evidence that the cabin has become a priority, not an afterthought. They exchanged glances, silently communicating in the shorthand of siblings who had grown up together. Finally, Daniel spoke for the group. That's fair. If we get this extension, we'll prove that we're serious about making the cabin a central part of our family's future, not just with words or legal documents, but with our time and presence. The conversation continued late into the evening. The specifics of their proposal refined and expanded as we discussed potential scenarios and challenges. By the time we finally retired for the night, a tentative path forward had emerged, contingent on the developer's willingness to delay their decision and on my children's ability to demonstrate through actions that their commitment was genuine. As I prepared for bed, moving through the familiar rituals of my nighttime routine, I found myself torn between hope and skepticism. The practical part of me recognized the exceptional nature of the developer's offer, the financial security it represented, the new possibilities it would open in my remaining years. The emotional part acknowledged the sincerity in my children's faces as they pledged to change long-established patterns, to make the cabin a priority rather than an obligation. Which path represented wisdom, and which represented weakness? Was I being practical or punitive? Protective of family legacy or resistant to necessary change? The questions circled without resolution as I slipped beneath the quilt that had warmed generations of Wilsons on cold lake nights. Outside my window, the moon cast silver light across the frozen lake, illuminating a landscape that had remained essentially unchanged since my grandfather first built this cabin 70 years ago. The constancy of that view had always been a comfort, a visual anchor in a world of constant flux. If the developer's plans proceeded, future eyes would see not this pristine expanse, but the lights of condominiums, the outline of a marina, the modified shoreline of progress and profit. Change was inevitable, of course. Nothing remained static, not landscapes or families or the careful plans we made for our lives. The question wasn't whether change would come, but what form it would take and who would shape it. Market forces and developers' visions, or the collective will of a family attempting to preserve something precious against the tide of modern disconnection. As sleep finally claimed me, one certainty emerged from the swirl of competing considerations. Whatever decision I ultimately made would be guided not by nostalgia or financial calculation alone, but by a clear-eyed assessment of what would best serve the family's authentic needs in the present and future, not just the preservation of its past. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off the frozen lake with diamond brilliance. I woke early, as was my habit, and found myself drawn to the porch despite the frigid temperature. Wrapped in Jack's old cardigan and a thick blanket, I watched the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. This view, this perfect, pristine view, had been my solace through decades of life's inevitable disappointments and sorrows. How many mornings had I sat here with coffee growing cold in my hands, finding peace in the unchanging beauty of nature while human concerns shifted and evolved around me. The sound of the door opening behind me broke my reverie. Daniel stepped onto the porch, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "Thought you might need a warm-up," he said, offering me one of the mugs. "It's freezing out here." "Thank you." I accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping cold fingers around its warmth. I wanted to watch one more sunrise over the lake before making any final decisions. He settled into the chair beside mine, bundled in his expensive down jacket. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the day brighten around us, the cold air crystallizing our breath into small clouds that dissipated in the morning light. "Did you know Dad brought me out here the morning after you told us he was sick?" Daniel said suddenly. "Just the 2 of us before dawn. We sat right here and watched the sun come up." I turned to him surprised. "He never told me that." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "He said he wanted me to understand something important about life, that even when everything seems to be falling apart, the sun still rises, the seasons still change, the lake freezes and thaws, and the world keeps turning." He sipped his coffee, lost in the memory. He told me that finding peace isn't about avoiding trouble. It's about remembering that trouble is temporary, but beauty is constant if you know where to look for it. My throat tightened at this glimpse of Jack I had never seen, my husband sharing wisdom with our son in a private moment I hadn't been privy to. That sounds like him. "I've thought about that conversation a lot over the years," Daniel continued. "Whenever work gets overwhelming or Jen and I hit a rough patch, I've always known I could come back here and sit on this porch, look at this view, and remember what matters." He turned to me, his expression vulnerable in a way I rarely saw, from my most guarded child. "I just didn't do it often enough." "Why not?" I asked gently. He considered the question with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "Because it was easier to believe the cabin would always be here, waiting, than to make the effort required to use it regularly. Because work always seemed more urgent. Because Jen doesn't really like rustic vacations." He shrugged, a gesture that acknowledged the inadequacy of these explanations. "Because I took it for granted, I suppose. The way we often take for granted the most important things until we're threatened with their loss." I nodded, understanding. All too well. Hadn't I done the same with Jack, assuming we would have decades more together, postponing trips and experiences until retirement, a retirement he never lived to see? I know we're asking a lot, Daniel said, returning his gaze to the lake. To trust that we'll change established patterns based on nothing more than promises and a legal agreement drafted over a weekend. I understand your skepticism. It's not just skepticism, Daniel. It's a practical assessment of what serves our family best at this point in our lives. This cabin has been a financial and emotional responsibility I've shouldered largely alone since your father died. I need to decide whether continuing that investment makes sense when weighed against other possibilities for my remaining years. Like traveling to Italy for those cooking classes you and Dad always talked about, or buying that bookstore in town you mentioned to Emma. I smiled faintly, touched that he remembered these long-deferred dreams. Among other things, yes. You deserve those experiences, Mom. After everything you've given us, all the sacrifices you've made, you deserve to pursue your own dreams without worrying about money or property maintenance. His acknowledgement of my sacrifices, so simply, stated yet so profound, loosened something tight in my chest. For years I had managed the cabin, preserved traditions, maintained connections without complaint or recognition. To hear my son acknowledge this effort felt like a validation I hadn't realized I needed. Thank you for saying that. The door opened again, and Emma emerged, followed closely by the twins, all bundled against the cold. "Morning powwow?" she asked, seeing Daniel and me deep in conversation. "Just catching the sunrise," I replied, "and discussing some important matters. Like whether you're going to call Rachel today about the extension?" Lisa appeared behind them, completing our family circle. "Yes, among other things." I checked my watch. "It's still early, but I'll try her cell phone after breakfast. She's eager to finalize this deal, so I imagine she'll answer despite it being Sunday." We retreated inside as the twins began complaining about the cold, their tolerance for winter. Wonderland's limited to the brief periods between warm meals and indoor activities. The kitchen soon filled with the comfortable chaos of family breakfast, Emma supervising pancake preparation, Lisa setting the table, Daniel attempting to fix the ancient coffee grinder that had chosen this morning to malfunction. Warren, never particularly comfortable in rustic settings, had offered to drive into town for fresh pastries, an excuse for a brief escape that no one begrudged him. After breakfast, I retreated to my bedroom to make the call to Rachel, wanting privacy for what might be a difficult conversation. She answered on the second ring, her professional tone suggesting she had been expecting my call. "Margaret, good morning. Have you reached a decision about the developer's offer?" "Not exactly," I replied. "My family has made a counter-proposal that I'd like to discuss with the developer." "A counteroffer regarding price?" "Because they've already indicated that their current offer is not about price," I interrupted. "About timing. My children are proposing to purchase the cabin themselves, but they need more time to formalize their agreement and secure financing. We're asking if the developer would be willing to give us 30 to 60 days before requiring a final decision." Rachel's hesitation spoke volumes. "I'll certainly present the request, but I should warn you that timing is a critical factor in their development plans. They've secured agreements with most of the other property owners in that section, and they're eager to close all transactions simultaneously." "I understand, but surely a delay of a month or two wouldn't significantly impact their overall timeline for a project of this scale." "Let me speak with them and get back to you," she said, her tone conveying skepticism but also respect for a longtime client. "When are you planning to return to town?" "We're driving back this afternoon. The children need to return to work tomorrow, and I have some appointments scheduled. I'll try to have an answer for you by then. And Margaret, just to be clear, if they decline the extension request, are you prepared to give them an answer about their current offer immediately?" The question crystallized the moment of decision I had been approaching all weekend. If the developer refused to wait, would I choose the certainty of their substantial offer or the uncertain promise of my children's commitment? Yes, I said. Finally. If they need an immediate answer, I'm prepared to give one. After ending the call, I rejoined my family in the living room, where they had gathered to continue discussions about their joint ownership plan. The twins were occupied with a board game in the corner, allowing the adults to speak freely. I spoke with Rachel, I announced. She'll present our request for an extension to the developer, but she wasn't optimistic. They've secured agreements with most of the other property owners and are eager to close all transactions together. Did she give you any indication of when we might hear back? Emma asked. The attorney in her focused on concrete timelines. She'll try to reach me before we leave this afternoon. If the developer refuses the extension, I let the implication hang in the air. Then you'll have to decide immediately. Lisa finished, her expression tense. Yes. The room fell silent as the gravity of our situation settled over us. Everything we had discussed this weekend, their detailed ownership plan, their promises of renewed commitment, their nostalgic reminiscences, all might come to nothing if the developer insisted on an immediate decision. Whatever happens, Daniel said finally, I want you to know that we support you, Mom. If you decide to accept their offer, we understand. Your financial security and future opportunities matter to us. Emma and Lisa nodded in agreement, though I could see the hope still burning in their eyes, the desire to preserve this place that represented so much of our shared history. Thank you for that, I said, touched by their mature response. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We may still get the extension we're hoping for. We spent the next few hours in purposeful activity, completing the packing we had begun, gathering the items I had decided to keep regardless of the cabin's fate, closing up certain areas of the house in preparation for possible weeks of vacancy. The twins, sensing the importance of this time, asked if they could explore the property one last time before we left. Emma accompanied them, leaving Lisa, Daniel, and me to finish the indoor tasks. As we worked, we reminisced about summers past, winters gathered around the fire, springs when the lake ice began to break up in spectacular fashion. The conversation had a bittersweet quality, acknowledging both the joy these memories brought and the possibility that no new ones would be created in this particular setting. Remember when Dad tried to teach us all to water ski in one afternoon? Lisa laughed, wrapping a set of family photos in protective tissue. And you were the only one who managed to stay upright for more than 10 seconds, Daniel added. He was so proud of you. He called you his natural athlete, I recalled. Said you had better balance than professional skiers. Meanwhile, I face-planted so hard my nose bled, Emma contributed, returning from the twins' outdoor expedition, in time to join our reminiscence. You got your revenge when you beat him at chess 3 times in one rainy weekend, I reminded her. He claimed he let you win, but I knew better. These stories, these shared recollections that only we 4 could fully appreciate, created a bubble of connection around us, a reminder of what the cabin had facilitated beyond its physical attributes. It wasn't just the building or the property or the view that mattered. It was the container these elements created for family bonding, for memory making, for the transmission of values and traditions across generations. By early afternoon, we had completed most of our tasks. The cars were packed with the items I had decided to keep. The cabin was secured for potential weeks of vacancy, and we gathered on the porch for one final view of the lake before departure. The winter sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, the temperature dropping as afternoon progressed toward evening. I guess this is it, Lisa said, her voice small in the vastness of the landscape before us. At least for today. At least for today, I echoed, neither confirming nor denying the possibility that this might be our final visit as owners. My phone rang, breaking the moment. Rachel's name flashed on the screen, and I felt my pulse quicken as I answered. Margaret, I've spoken with the developer, she began without preamble. I'm afraid they're not willing to extend the decision timeline. They need an answer by tomorrow noon, as originally requested. Though I had anticipated this response, the finality of it still landed with physical force. I see. No flexibility at all? None. They've emphasized that their financing and permits are contingent on acquiring all properties in this section simultaneously. They've made it clear that if you decline, they'll immediately approach other property owners in adjacent areas, which could significantly devalue your cabin if you choose to sell later. A thinly veiled threat, but an effective one. If the development proceeded around us, the cabin's value as a rustic retreat would diminish substantially, surrounded by construction noise and eventually luxury condominiums. Thank you for trying, Rachel. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision. I ended the call and turned to find 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me, reading the answer in my expression before I spoke. No extension, Daniel stated rather than asked. No, they need an answer by noon tomorrow. Emma stepped forward, her expression determined. Then we need to make this work without an extension. We've already drafted the LLC agreement. I can file the paperwork first thing tomorrow morning. Daniel has spoken with his bank about securing immediate financing for the purchase. We can make this happen quickly. It's not just about speed, Emma. It's about certainty. The developer is offering a guaranteed sum with minimal complications. Your plan involves multiple parties, financing approvals, and ongoing commitments that may or may not be fulfilled over time. We know it's a risk, Lisa acknowledged. We're asking you to trust us based on promises rather than proven patterns. But isn't that what family does sometimes? Take leaps of faith in each other. I looked at my 3 children, Emma with her lawyer's precision, Daniel with his businessman's practicality, Lisa with her optimist's heart, and saw both the adults they had become and the children they had been. How many leaps of faith had I taken as their mother? How many times had I chosen to believe in their potential rather than focus on their limitations? Let me think about it overnight, I said finally. This isn't a decision to make standing on a porch in the cold. I'll call Rachel in the morning with my answer. They nodded, accepting that this was the best they could hope for under the circumstances. We completed our goodbyes to the cabin, the twins insisting on one last look at their bedrooms, Lisa lingering in the kitchen where so many family meals had been prepared, Daniel checking that the dock was properly secured for winter weather. As we prepared to drive away, Emma approached me while the others were occupied with final loading of vehicles. Mom, regardless of what you decide, I want you to know that this weekend has changed something for me. Being here, talking about what this place means, remembering Dad and all our time together, it's reminded me of what matters. Whatever happens with the cabin itself, I'm committed to making our family connections stronger. More visits, more regular communication, more intentional time together. I hugged her, sensing the sincerity behind her words. That means more to me than any property ever could. The drive home passed in contemplative silence. I had declined offers to ride with any of my children, preferring the solitude of my own car to process the weekend's events and the decision that awaited me in the morning. As the familiar landscape passed outside my windows, the small town near the lake, the highway that connected it to the city, the suburbs gradually giving way to urban density, I weighed options and implications with the careful consideration I had applied to major decisions throughout my life. The developer's offer represented security, possibility, freedom from financial constraints that had limited my choices since Jack's death. It would allow me to pursue deferred dreams, to travel, without counting pennies, to consider moving closer to one of my children if I chose. It was the practical choice, the financially sound decision, the option that prioritized my future over preservation of the past. My children's proposal represented continuity, legacy, the transmission of values and traditions to future generations. It would maintain a physical location for family gatherings, preserve a connection to Jack and our shared history, keep alive the possibility of new memories in a beloved setting. It was the emotional choice, the family-centered decision, the option that prioritized connection over convenience. By the time I reached home, exhaustion had temporarily overwhelmed my capacity for clear thinking. I unpacked only the essentials, leaving most of the items from the cabin in my car to be dealt with tomorrow after my decision was made. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a group text from my children. "We love you, Mom. Whatever you decide tomorrow, we know it will be what's best for all of us. Thank you for this weekend and for listening to our perspective. Sleep well." Their simple message, free from pressure or manipulation, touched me deeply. This was the essence of family at its best, supporting individual choices while maintaining connection, acknowledging differences while affirming love. Whatever happened with the cabin, this weekend had already succeeded in strengthening bonds that had begun to fray through neglect and geographic distance. I slept fitfully, dreams blending memories of the past with visions of possible futures. Jack appeared in these dreams, sometimes as the young man who had proposed on the cabin's dock, sometimes as the middle-aged father teaching our children to fish, sometimes as he had been in his final years, still vibrant, but with the shadow of mortality edging his smile. Morning arrived with the clarity that often follows restless nights. I rose early, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with paper and pen, methodically listing the pros and cons of each option as I had taught my students to do when facing difficult decisions. The practical advantages of selling to the developer filled one column. The emotional benefits of preserving family legacy filled the other. Both choices offered genuine value. Both involved real sacrifices. Both would irreversibly shape my remaining years and my children's future relationship with their past. I was still contemplating these lists when my phone rang at precisely 8:30 a.m. Rachel, punctual as always. "Good morning, Margaret. I don't mean to pressure you, but the developer is quite eager for your decision. They've asked me to check in and see if you've made up your mind." "I have," I replied, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "Please tell them I appreciate their generous offer, but I will not be selling the cabin at this time." Rachel's surprise was audible. "Are you certain? This is an exceptional offer, well above market value. If it's about price, perhaps there's room for further negotiation." "It's not about price," I explained. "It's about purpose. The cabin still serves an important function in my family's life, one that became clearer to me this weekend than it has been in years. I understand this may impact the developer's plans, and I'm sorry for any inconvenience, but my decision is final." After ending the call, I immediately dialed Emma, knowing she would likely be awake and preparing for work. Her voice was tight, with anxiety when she answered. "Mom, have you decided?" "I have. I've just told Rachel that I'm declining the developer's offer." Her sharp intake of breath was followed by a moment of stunned silence. "Really? You're keeping the cabin?" "Not exactly," I said, smiling at my clever daughter's immediate assumption. "I'm not selling it to the developer, but I'm not keeping it either. I'm transferring ownership to the three of you through the LLC structure you proposed." "Mom, I don't even know what to say. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This weekend showed me that the cabin still matters. To all of you. To the twins. To our family's sense of connection to each other and to your father's memory. But it also showed me that I'm ready for a new chapter, one that doesn't include the responsibilities of property management or the emotional weight of maintaining traditions single-handedly." "We'll honor this trust," Emma promised, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll use it, maintain it, make it the gathering place it was meant to be." "I believe you will," I said, and realized I truly did. The conversations we'd had this weekend, the insights shared, the commitments made, all had convinced me that my children were ready to step into this responsibility, to preserve what mattered, while allowing necessary evolution. "There are conditions," I added. The legal transfer will include a life estate for me, ensuring I always have access and usage rights. And I expect to be a regular guest, not a caretaker. The maintenance, scheduling, and financial responsibilities will be entirely yours to manage through the LLC. Of course, Emma agreed immediately. That's exactly what we want, for you to enjoy the cabin without worrying about its upkeep or future. The calls to Daniel and Lisa followed similar patterns. Initial disbelief, followed by profound gratitude and solemn promises to honor the cabin's legacy while respecting my need for a new phase of life. By mid-morning, emails were flying between them about filing the LLC paperwork, scheduling a meeting with a real estate attorney, and planning the first official family gathering under the new ownership structure. As I hung up from the last call, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The decision, once made, seemed obvious in retrospect. The cabin would remain in the family, preserving our connection to Jack and to the generations before us. My children would shoulder the responsibilities of its maintenance, forcing them to collaborate and communicate in ways that would strengthen their adult relationships. The twins and any future grandchildren would grow up knowing this special place, creating their own memories alongside the stories of those who had come before. And I would be free. Free to travel to Italy for those long-deferred cooking classes. Free to explore the possibility of buying that small bookstore in town. Free to visit my children in their home cities without feeling obligated to maintain a property they rarely used. Free to be Margaret Wilson, not just mother, widow, or caretaker of family traditions, but a woman with her own dreams and priorities in this final chapter of her life. That evening, I sorted through the items I had brought back from the cabin, deciding which to keep in my home for daily remembrance and which to return for the family's collective use. Jack's fishing tackle and handmade flies would go back, available, for Daniel to use with the twins and any future grandchildren. The family photo albums would remain with me, digitized copies already promised to each child. The quilt Jack's mother had made for our wedding would stay on my bed, its familiar weight a comfort on cold nights. As I worked, I found myself humming, a tune Jack used to sing during our drives to the cabin. Some old folk song about rivers flowing to the sea, yet never running dry. The melody had always seemed melancholy to me, but tonight it felt like a benediction, a reminder that change and continuity could coexist, that endings often contained beginnings if we had the wisdom to recognize them. The cabin would remain, but its purpose in my life had transformed. No longer a burden of solitary maintenance, but a gift freely given. No longer a repository of grief for what had been lost, but a vessel for new joy in what might still be created. Like the river in Jack's song, our family would continue to flow forward, finding new channels while remaining essentially itself, carrying the past into the future without being trapped by it. And I would flow forward too, carrying memories like precious stones in my pockets, valuable but not weighing me down, cherished but not limiting my progress toward horizons I had yet to explore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.